40,000 years ago, the last Neanderthals of Europe found themselves trapped in a tightening vise of extinction. To the east and south, modern humans armed with a deadly new toolkit advanced through Germany and France, while to the west they had already crossed into England, sealing off escape routes. Hemmed in between these fronts, the Neanderthals of Goyet Cave in Belgium were pushed into an ever-narrowing corridor of survival, their hunting grounds shrinking and their social bonds fraying. At Goyet Cave, this pressure erupted into eating of human flesh and the violent breaking of bones for marrow, stark signs of desperation. Together, the evidence from this site captures the grim reality of a people cornered, caught in a death trap, where conflict, hunger, and encroaching modern humans left no way out. It is tempting to imagine the final Neanderthals fading quietly into the cold winds of Europe, overwhelmed by forces of nature and time. Yet the evidence from France and Belgium tells a more brutal story, one of conflict, competition, and displacement. Around 45,000 years ago, modern humans, armed with innovative weapons, including bows and arrows, began to spread across Europe. Their arrival coincides with signs of ecological pressure, demographic expansion, and the shrinking territories of Neanderthal populations who had once dominated the region. Some of these Neanderthals, driven from their homelands in the Dordogne region of southwestern France, migrated north into Belgium. There, at the site of Goyet Cave, they met a grisly fate. Their bones, cut, fractured, and even reused as tools, provide clear testimony that they were eaten. Based on the type of defleshing technique used, the perpetrators were other Neanderthals, and the larger context suggests this was part of a broader story of displacement, a desperate struggle on the very eve of Neanderthal extinction. The evidence tells us that human flesh-eating among Neanderthals wasn't an isolated late survival tactic, but part of their behavioral repertoire, stretching deep into their history. Imagine a small band of Neanderthals, driven from Dordogne after losing access to their hunting grounds. They follow the Loire northward, carrying what they can, hunting reindeer along the riverbanks. They skirt the Paris basin, perhaps encountering signs of strangers, new hunting tools unlike their own. Tension rises as food becomes scarcer. Eventually, they move into Belgium, following the Meuse, only to arrive in the territory of another Neanderthal group, or perhaps Homo sapiens already pressing into the region. In the dark chambers of Goyet, their bones tell us how the journey ended, butchered, marrow cracked, even recycled as tools. The bones make clear that the Goyet Neanderthals were killed and consumed by other humans rather than animals. But were those humans other Neanderthals or were they Homo sapiens? This remains an open question. The archaeological layers containing the defleshed Neanderthals are associated with Mousterian artifacts, traditionally linked to Neanderthals. The modern human remains found at Goyet date much later, to around 35,000 years ago. On this basis, the safest conclusion is that the victims were eaten by other Neanderthals, local groups turning on migrants. An isotopic study of Neanderthals from the cavern of Goyet provides a startling window into this movement. By analyzing sulfur isotopes in their bones, researchers discovered that some of the Neanderthals at Goyet did not match the local ecological signature of Belgium. Instead, their isotopic values pointed south, to the geology of southwestern France. Local Belgian fauna and the local Neanderthals at Goyet show isotopic values around 7 to 8%. Values significantly higher, 9 to 13%, are interpreted as non-local, matching geology further south. Southwestern France in the Pleistocene would have received Atlantic marine influence much more directly than inland Belgium, raising baseline sulfur isotope values in the food web. From a migration and ecology standpoint, the closest analogues to Goyet would be the sites of Charente Valley. These sites sit between the Loire and Dordogne rivers, meaning they bridge the divide from Belgium and southwestern France. These sites also show evidence of harsh treatment of human bodies. They hunted similar cold-adapted species, horse, bison, reindeer. Some isotope values align with Goyet patterns. Migration-wise, if Goyet groups moved following reindeer herds, this valley would have been a natural wintering ground. This finding indicates that a group of Neanderthals had moved northward, carrying with them the chemical imprint of their homeland. On foot, following river valleys, likely passing through modern-day Paris, the journey would have been 600 miles of travel, which would have taken 6 months, but probably a year or more of migration. Evidence indicates these Neanderthals had a matrilineal kinship with the Belgium Neanderthals, which is likely why they moved to the region. A single Neanderthal group could have migrated from the Charente Valley to the Goyet Caves in Belgium within the span of a single year by moving deliberately along established natural corridors. Starting in the Charente Valley, they would likely have followed the Vienne River north until it joined the Loire, then continued through the fertile Loire Valley, where herds of horse, bison and reindeer were abundant. From there, they could cross the open grasslands of the Paris Basin, a relatively flat and resource-rich area that provided both sheltering woodlands and reliable fresh water. Travelling in a small family unit of perhaps 20 Neanderthals, they could have advanced at a rate of 2 or 3 miles per day. The final leg would carry them northeast, through the rolling hills of Champagne and into the Ardennes, a more rugged landscape that led directly to the limestone plateaus housing the Goyet Caves. Such a journey, though demanding, would have been entirely feasible within 1 year, requiring steady movement, careful use of rivers and valleys as natural highways, and an avoidance of heavily occupied Neanderthal territories, ensuring both access to resources and relative safety along the route. The Goyet site is one of the most chilling in Neanderthal history. Excavations revealed 6 Neanderthals, including 4 adults or young adults and 2 children, all dated to around 40,000 years ago, whose bones bore unmistakable signs of defleshing. Based on the genetic samples, 2 were male, 2 female, and 2 could not be determined due to fragmentary DNA. Some of the Neanderthals had the same maternal lineage, suggesting a close relationship, though it is unclear if they were a single group. Researchers successfully extracted nuclear DNA from the Goyet Q56 specimen, a right femur belonging to a female Neanderthal. When compared to other Neanderthals with available nuclear DNA, Goyet Q56 shows the closest genetic relationship to Spy94A from Spy Cave, also in Belgium, but clusters most strongly with Q374, a female child about 7 years old, though isotopic analysis suggests they spent their recent years in France. Goyet Q56 and Q374, represented by a partial jawbone, may have even been mother, child or aunt, niece, though the data isn't fine-grained enough to prove that. Goyet Q376 was a 10-year-old Neanderthal child whose bones show clear-cut marks, percussion marks and evidence of defleshing. This child was one of the Neanderthals also identified as having undergone marrow extraction. In the ancient DNA work, Q376 stands out because it gave one of the clearer signals of Neanderthal ancestry, also distinct from Spy Cave. Given the fact that this was a young child, this proves that these Neanderthals left France within the previous year and had only recently arrived at Goyet, possibly only weeks before they were killed and eaten. Goyet Q305, an adult, is one of the most important Goyet Neanderthal samples because DNA was fully sequenced. Goyet Q305's bones were found with cut marks and evidence of marrow extraction, just like other Goyet Neanderthals. The fact that his or her remains were processed for food suggests that she was one of the victims of the headhunters. Unlike Q56, Q305 seems to have been part of the local Goyet community, and the only local who was eaten. However, human flesh-eating among Neanderthals is not unique to Goyet. Sites in France have also yielded evidence of butchery, but Goyet is distinctive in its context. The isotopic data show a clear division between local Neanderthals, who were not eaten, and the Neanderthals from southwestern France, who were. This contrast suggests exocannibalism, the violent killing and consumption of outsiders, rather than the recycling of one's own dead. The group who had journeyed north were not incorporated into the local community. Instead, they were slaughtered. In fact, cut marks trace the slicing away of flesh. Percussion fractures show deliberate breaking of long bones to extract marrow. Ribs bear evidence of dismemberment of the thoracic cage. Some bones were even recycled as retouchers, used to sharpen stone tools after their nutritional value had been stripped away. In every sense, The Goyet Neanderthals were processed like prey animals. The skeletal representation, dominated by tibias and femurs lacking extremities, mirrors the treatment of horses and reindeer found in the same deposits. Why did they leave southwest France for Belgium? The most likely explanation is the pressure of Homo sapiens expansion. The Dordogne region is so dense with caves and shelters that it has often been called the Neanderthal homeland. The limestone geology creates countless caves and rock shelters, which preserved both bones and artifacts exceptionally well. The closest French genetic match for the non-local Goyet Neanderthals is Les Cottes in the Charente Valley of France. If the non-local Goyet Neanderthals indeed originated in southwest France, Les Cottes and similar sites are prime candidates for their homeland. The isotopic match comes from the limestone-rich river valleys, and culturally, these Neanderthals already show the transitional toolkits found at Goyet as well. But by 40,000 years ago, Les Cottes was occupied by modern humans. At the site of Le Roy, also in the Charente Valley of southwest France, about 50 miles from Les Cottes, archaeologists uncovered a Neanderthal jawbone that showed cut marks consistent with deliberate defleshing dated to around 40,000 years. Some researchers have suggested that this treatment indicates that the extracted teeth may have been strung into a necklace or kept as trophies by the modern humans who occupied the site. The idea of Neanderthal remains being used symbolically in this way is striking and could indicate why the Neanderthals left the region and migrated north to Belgium. As modern humans established themselves in southern and central France, Neanderthals were squeezed out of their traditional hunting territories. Forced migrations would have been a natural response, a search for new lands where resources were more plentiful and competitors less numerous. But as these exiled groups travelled into Belgium, they encountered other Neanderthals, perhaps locals at Spy Cave and Goyet, and possibly even early Homo sapiens already pushing into the region. Their arrival was not met with hospitality. Within weeks of their arrival, they were dead. Yet the broader context complicates this picture. Homo sapiens were in Europe by 45,000 years ago, as demonstrated by fossils in Bulgaria, Italy, and elsewhere. They carried with them new technologies, perhaps even bows and arrows, that would have given them a decisive advantage in combat. The displacement of Neanderthals from southwestern France suggests that their encounters with Homo sapiens were not benign. If modern humans were present in northern France and Belgium at the time, they could have been the perpetrators at Goyet, but tool marks indicate this was done by other Neanderthals. Modern humans reached Europe much earlier than once thought. The classic model placed their arrival around 40,000 years ago, sweeping across the continent in the Aurignacian expansion that followed the Neanderthal collapse. But a series of discoveries has pushed that date back. Fossils from Ranis, Germany, dated to at least 45,000 years ago, show that Homo sapiens had already penetrated deep into the continent as early as 49,000 years ago. The archaeological record reveals blade and point technologies that are associated with Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. This timing places modern humans squarely in England, Germany and France, as the Neanderthals were making their last stand. Indeed, a 50,000-year-old carved bear bone found in Germany may have been made by Neanderthals, indicating a capacity for artistic expression, though the date overlaps modern human presence. These early Homo sapiens were not just different in appearance. They brought with them cultural and technological systems that altered the balance of survival. They built broader social networks, exchanged materials over long distances, and produced ornaments and symbolic objects. Crucially, they appear to have carried with them new weapons. Evidence from Grotte Mandrin in southeastern France suggests that bow and arrow technology may have been present by at least 55,000 years ago. Stone points small enough to serve as arrowheads or darts appear in contexts associated with early Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. This weaponry gave them a critical edge: ranged hunting, the ability to kill from a distance, and the possibility of launching volleys of projectiles. In a world where close-quarter spear thrusting defined Neanderthal hunting, the bow was a revolution. While Homo sapiens were advancing into Eastern Europe, Neanderthals still held sway in southwestern France. The Dordogne region had been Neanderthal territory for hundreds of thousands of years. Sites such as Lakina, Saint-Césaire and others reveal dense occupations during the Middle Paleolithic. These regions were rich in game. Reindeer, horses, mammoths and bison roamed the steppe-like landscapes, while caves provided shelter. The archaeological record shows Neanderthals here had developed efficient hunting strategies, targeting prime-aged reindeer and carefully processing carcasses for marrow and hides. Yet by about 45,000 years ago, the situation was changing. Faunal records show increasing stress on large herbivores. Hunting pressure intensified, and mammoth populations began to decline in certain regions. At the same time, the appearance of Upper Paleolithic stone tools, blades, bone points, ornaments, signals the arrival of Homo sapiens. Southwestern France, once a secure Neanderthal heartland, was now contested ground. Competition for prey, shelter and territory must have been fierce. It is in this context that we can imagine some Neanderthal groups being displaced, whether through violent encounters, slow attrition or loss of access to critical hunting grounds. Communities that had lived in France for millennia found themselves forced to move. Neanderthals hunted with thrusting spears, requiring close-range engagement with large and dangerous prey. Injuries to Neanderthal skeletons show frequent trauma consistent with such confrontations. Modern humans, by contrast, possessed ranged weapons, spear throwers, and by 55,000 years ago, bows and arrows. Stone points of appropriate size and shape have been found in contexts that suggest use as arrowheads. A small, well-aimed arrow can bring down large game, and volleys of arrows can overwhelm even dangerous predators. In human conflict, the bow would have been transformative. Neanderthals, forced into hand-to-hand combat with thrusting spears, could scarcely compete against enemies who rained projectiles from a distance. Modern humans could harass, weaken and kill Neanderthals with far less risk to themselves. If conflict between the groups did occur, as seems increasingly likely given the evidence of displacement, the technological imbalance would have been decisive. It defies belief that modern humans would not use these weapons against Neanderthals to drive them from their hunting grounds and preferred cave sites. The extremely territorial Neanderthals would not have welcomed the newcomers to their caves and sat around the fire singing Kumbaya. The story of the Neanderthals at Goyet is thus best understood in the wider frame of competition and displacement. In southwestern France, Neanderthals faced growing pressure from incoming Homo sapiens armed with new technologies and expanding populations. The ecological niches that had sustained Neanderthals for millennia began to erode. Mammoth and reindeer, the staples of Neanderthal diets, were now hunted not only by them, but by the newcomers. As game became scarcer and hunting grounds more contested, some Neanderthal groups were forced to abandon their homelands. The journey northward into Belgium was an attempt at survival, but arrival in a new land brought them into conflict with local Neanderthal groups. Whether the events at Goyet was driven by hunger, warfare or ritual, its victims were the displaced groups. Their fate highlights the brutal social dynamics of the period, communities under pressure, turning violently on outsiders, even consuming their flesh. But Goyet Cave is not an isolated case. The broader record of late Neanderthal sites shows growing diversity in treatment of the dead. At Spy Cave, only a short distance from Goyet, Neanderthals were buried without signs of being eaten. This variation reflects a time of crisis. As Neanderthals faced ecological stress, shrinking territories, and competition from Homo sapiens, their behaviors became more variable, even desperate. The events at Goyet thus embodies both the uniqueness and the desperation of Neanderthals at the end. It was not their universal practice, but rather a symptom of a population under extraordinary pressure, fragmented into small, vulnerable groups. In this context, the arrival of modern humans, with larger populations, broader networks, and superior weaponry, proved overwhelming. By 39,000 years ago, the last Neanderthals had disappeared from Western Europe, except possibly in Iberia. Their final refuges may have been in southern Iberia and isolated pockets elsewhere, but the archaeological record becomes sparse. In their place, Homo sapiens spread across the continent, carrying with them the Aurignacian culture, symbolic art, and a rapidly expanding population. The replacement was swift in evolutionary terms, occurring within a few millennia of first contact. The bones at Goyet, however, remind us that extinction was not a passive process. It was a struggle, marked by conflict, violence, and human-on-human predation. Neanderthals were not simply erased by climate or chance. They were pushed, displaced, and sometimes consumed. Their end was written in the expansion of our own species, armed with technologies and strategies that reshaped the human world forever. The story of the Goyet Neanderthals offers a unique window into the final chapter of Neanderthal life. Isotopes reveal their origins in southwestern France, from which they were displaced by the expansion of modern humans into Europe by 45,000 years ago. Their remains, butchered and consumed in Belgium, tell of a grim encounter, outsiders falling victim to violence and consumption. Whether killed by local Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens, their fate was sealed by the competition unleashed by the arrival of modern humans, armed with new weapons, perhaps bows and arrows. This was not a gentle fading of a species, but a violent and chaotic replacement, in which displacement, conflict, and exocannibalism played decisive roles. In the bones of the Goyet victims, we see both the resilience and the vulnerability of Neanderthals. They carried with them the memory of their homelands in France, but in a world reshaped by new human arrivals, their exile ended in tragedy. Thank you for watching.